Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for the invitation. Although the First International has not been my central field of research, so I will try to put the issue more or less in relation to my own research and reconsider what we call the genealogy of, sorry, doesn't work? Okay, so I will reconsider the genealogy of the Federación Regional Española, of the Spanish section of the, okay. In May 1871, during the final days of the Paris Commune, the Spanish Parliament held the first debate concerning the AIT. The debate was opened when a representative from the Republican opposition, Baldomero Lostau, accused the civil governor of the province of Barcelona, I quote, of violating the constitutional articles that acknowledge citizens' right to assemble and to organize. Lostau declared himself a member of AIT's Federación Regional Española, FRE, whose foundational congress had taken place in Barcelona during the summer of 1870, the year before. In the session of May 22, the Minister of Government, Sagasta, told Lostau that the tension that afflicted Barcelona had a lot to do with the presence of communers connected with the International in the city. The pro-government media published the name of 3 Frenchmen deported from Barcelona because of their supposed connection with Paris. Adolphe Royanet, a Blanquist who had been defeated in the Marseille Commune, André Michel, and Edmond Nodot. According to Sagasta, these men had been expulsed following the Barcelona governor's recommendation because they held, I quote, credentials from the Paris Commune. In early June, Sagasta granted all governors unlimited powers in the repression of the International, and the newborn FRE's Federal Council left Madrid and sought refuge in Lisbon for months. 2 different, albeit overlapping, historiographic narratives consider 1871 as the key episode in the genesis of the AIT's Spanish section, not only because of the actors and causes behind the formation of the FRE between 1869 and the Congress of The Hague in 1872, but also because of the long-term consequences of those 3 foundational years. In the historiographic narrative launched by Max Nedlow, the government's repression against the newborn FRE, generated by the Commune's impact, laid the ground for the definitive fall of Bakuninism and its clandestine alliance of social democracy across the country. Thus, what was started by Bakuninist Giuseppe Fanelli's visit to Madrid and Barcelona in late 1869 and the intensified contact with Geneva of the small Barcelona nucleus during 1870 would be completed with the political atmosphere of 1871, which propitiated the leadership of the few highly ideological groups that were sheltered by global connections and which were willing and prepared for covert action. According to this narrative, the FRE Federal Council temporary exile in Lisbon would in fact trigger the historical sequences that would end in the crystallization of a revolutionary trade unionism whose insurrectional as opposite to institutional horizon made it anti-political. For example, for Mexican historian Clara Lida, I quote her, the month between the end of the Commune and the uprising of Alcoy in July 1873 showed that the FRE carefully developed a strategy that allowed it to veer towards clandestine operation following the model designed by the Bakuninist alliance. This strategy to shield a vanguard that operated in the shadows favored, for instance, the elections of delegates, of Spanish delegates to the AIT's 1870 Congress in The Hague, who were faithful to Bakunin and his alliance, even though the political candidates with powerful local roots, such as Lostau, obtained practically the same number of votes. These 4 Spanish delegates, Bakuninists, moved rapidly from The Hague to Saint-Imier. Edouard talked before about Saint-Imier, where they repudiated the political path set by London and Marx, thus participating in the AIT's schism. This move was itself repudiated by some local chapters, particularly from Catalonia. On the other hand, in the historiographic narrative that focuses on Spain's agitated political life after the Bourbon fall in 1868, however, a fundamental actor in 71 was interclass and federalist republicanism, embodied in the Partido Republicano Federal. The Federal Republican Party became the principal opposition to and democratizing force in the interior of the new monarchy after the conflictive constitutional debates of '69 were resolved with the contested election in 1870 of a new king in the person of Prince Amadeo of Savoy. The democratic and federal legitimacy of French communal municipalism became an emblematic issue for the relevant sectors of Spanish federal republicanism in the month between the summer of 1870 and the summer of 1871. This second narrative has encouraged a reconsideration of 1871 by highlighting the role of federal republicanism in FRE early expansion, thus qualifying the importance of the early Bakunonist groups and their global networks. My paper engages both narratives as the starting point of a brief social history of the year 1871 in urban Spain, and I want to point out urban Spain, that reevaluates the weight of the global and national factors which have so far received most of the attention in the light of an episode of apparently a local scale. This episode, however, will prove to be anything but merely local, and its analysis is doubly revealing. First, because it motivated the tussle between Lostau and Sagasta in the parliament, and I argue the repression unleashed against the FRE First Federal Council. Indeed, my argument is that the first repressive way used the commune and its global reach in a long-term internal battle. So, this episode is also revealing because trade unionism, organized around class as defined by trade, and plebeian and municipalist republicanism converge in it as they had already done, for example in Barcelona, much before 1869. Minister Sagasta began his parliamentary address on May 22, 1871, by reading a telegram in which the governor of Barcelona, Bernardo Iglesias, declared that he had, I quote, the satisfaction of writing from the great factory of the Batlló brothers, which today has opened its door to work after 3 months of shutdown. In his speech, Sagasta proceeded to justify Iglesias' recommended expulsion of the 3 French commoners who had contributed to the strike, who had supposedly contributed to the strike that has paralyzed the Batlló factory in Barcelona precisely during the 70 days of the Paris Commune. Governor Iglesias had also ordered the detention of Gaspar Sentignon, a surgeon who moved recently to Barcelona from Vienna and who was close to Bakunin. The government blamed the internationalist actors and networks, whose main nodes were far from Barcelona, for the local strike, and the pro-government press in Madrid represented the forceful end of the strike as part of a global landscape of the defeat of the Commune. The notable impact of the Batlló factory strike in Barcelona daily life is well established in the documentary record. This is especially true of documents produced after the clashes between dozens of strikers and policemen during the last day of March, during which one of the overseers of the cotton factory was mortally wounded, end of March, a few days after the Communal Proclamation in Paris. Two factors seem to explain at first sight the patrician perception that external influences were decisive in the Batlló strike. First, the emblematic character of the Batlló factory that was by then the largest textile factory in Spain and the largest private building in Barcelona. And second, the fact that it was precisely during the strike and the first day of the Commune in March 1871 that the union that had called for strike at the end of February, the trade federation Tres Clases de Vapor, 3 steam classes, joined the AIT. Gaspar Saint-Aignan was not to going suffer alone in the military castle of Montjuic. He was joined by Clement Beauvais, director of the Tres Clases de Vapor, who was also detained in the last days of the Commune. But, and this is important, Beauvais's public life as the union leader of the local cotton spinners had started much before the consolidation of the Barcelona Bakunanist group between late 69 and early 1870. Beauvais had already led a general cotton strike in Barcelona more than 2 years ago, and the issues behind that first strike were a prelude to the more intense strike at Batlló in 1871. Workers were opposite to the reduction of piece work tariffs caused by the introduction of more productive machines, especially self-acting mills in spinning, and they also condemned the attempts to hire women for textile jobs that were traditionally masculine, such as operating the spinning mills. A feminization that was inseparable from the capitalist transformation of a particular relationship between warlock and workers' remuneration. Both syndical complaints had been around the Catalan cotton industry since at least the second half of the 1850s. In the Fundational Congress of the FRE in 1870, the same Clement Beauvais had reminded participants of the decisive leadership of the Spinners' Union in the organization of Spain's first general strike, which took place in the summer of 1855. From the 1860s on, spinners' reluctance to mine more spinning mules was a constant source of tension in the Catalan textile industry. Textile mill spinners' defense of the piece rate systems by which their teams were paid a set price for each pound of thread that they produce was the tip of the iceberg of a mill labor culture. Insofar as the spinners recruited, organized, and benefit from the labor of their assistants, or piecers, they were sort of internal subcontractors, by using the expression by William Lazonick, related to the Lancashire cotton spinnings. It was the same in Barcelona. For spinners, maintaining the traditional correlation between workload and remuneration was essential because increases in productivity and income obtained by decreasing their organizational capacity and thus intensifying their own manual labor reduced their authority inside and outside the factory. The hiring of women compounded the devaluation of the trade. In brief, textile mill labor culture was characterized by interconnected elements of autonomy and hierarchy that were independent from and would eventually become opposed to the efficiency of capital. A trade culture that had been growing in the decades of the 1840s and 1850s was very much alive in Barcelona when the AIT arrived. During the 1869 strike, for example, mill owners accused Beauvais and his unionized spinners of, I quote, wanted to fix the number of operators each machine required and intervene in the organization of the mills and their personnel, no less. Second side of the same episode. Also in the response of May 22, Minister Sagasta alerted Republican Representative Lostau, and I quote him again, against that cloud of foreigners who come under orders of what has become the Paris Commune, that was, I think, two days after the Versailles attack on the Commune, adding at Sagasta that there is no doubt that they are also in contact with others which, despite going by a different name, are well known to everyone. But what other communes or local powers was Sagasta alluding to. Indeed, the Diputación Provincial de Barcelona was by then the highest public institution governed in Spain by the Federal Republican Party. Federal candidates had won a majority in the Diputación, that was a greater municipalities of the province, and was also an elected provincial government in the March 1871 election, the first held by universal male suffrage in Spain after the new constitution of '69. And the tensions between the Diputación and the monarchical government in Madrid had not ceased since then, with the double shadow cast by the strike workers in Barcelona and the Paris Commune. During the repression unleashed against the tres clases de vapor in Barcelona between the 19th and 27th of May, which coincided exactly with Balzaic's final attack against the Commune, the Spanish government carried out the military occupation of the Palacio de la Diputación, harassing its Republican officials and orchestrating the collective destitution and legal proceedings against almost all of them. In other words, in the spring of '71, the Spanish government used the Commune image as a plebeian insurrection defeated to legitimize its simultaneous political and police offensive against trade unions and Barcelona's democratic and popular republicanism. The presence of internationalist networks in Comuna Paris and in post-68 Barcelona provided the best alibi for justifying repression. But the real objective of the government was to discredit and weaken the link between trade unionism and democratic republicanism formed well before 1869, even so that later had very little to do with the anti-political syndicalism of the early Bakuninist nucleus in Barcelona. The links between manual workers and political republicanism were varied and very visible in Barcelona in this period. Federal Republican candidates won by a landslide the main Catalan cities in the March election 1871. Thanks to the new electoral law born from the '69 Constitution, the electorate include all men aged over 25. Republicans won a clear victory in the city, taking 9 of the 14 districts. Starting in early April, the Diputación was to be presided by Josep Anselm Clavé, a long-time Republican who had worked as a lathe operator and who was, according to a monarchist witness, I quote, a two-beat singer that led the worst of society. Cantante de café. Clavé's enormous popular reputation came from his condition as artist worker, for since the 1840s he had been founding and promoting workers' choirs across Spain, the Coros de Clavé, following Alphonse Bianchi model. He had been, for example, the first to adapt into Spanish and also into Catalan La Marseillaise in the 1840s. During the first day of the 1868 revolution, Clavé had exhorted the trade unions of Barcelona to support the Federal Republican Party and to reject all anti-political arguments. It is therefore no strange then that during the days of May 1871, the Diputación presided by Clavé publicly condemned Governor Iglesias for, I quote, abuse of power and persecuting of workers' societies. So, in early May, the central government pressure on the Republican Diputación, which included the stationing of troops in Diputación buildings, seemed to bring the Barcelona historical experience closer to that of Paris, although the Spanish government never lost control of the situation. The numerous instances of appropriation of the Commune on the part of Spanish federal republicanism must be read in light of this episode of doubly plebeian, syndicalist, and democratic affirmation, and of its swift repression. Equally, the myth of a people capable of insurrection in Barcelona, for example, was not only born from the wars and actions of Geneva, Bakunin, or Paris, but from specifically Spanish 19th century historical process and actors. And let me just give you a short example. I'm referring here to the Milicia Nacional. In the Barcelona press during the days of the Commune, there was a lot of articles claiming the final dissolution of the Paris Garde Nationale. Yeah. So I'm referring here to the Militia Nacional, a sort of Garde Nationale that during most periods of its existence in Spain since the 1840s was densely plebeian, and which had seen its last action in the fall of 1868 in Barcelona. Its units then, which were at the time composed of workers and commanded by Republican militants, had been defeated in late 68, had been defeated and disarmed by the army after 2 days of street combats. This episode, in which the civil militias were crushed by the military, replicated similar situation living in the city in Barcelona itself in 1842, 1843, and 1855, 1856. For example, in 1855, the national militia of Barcelona had been purged of its democratic republican leadership and its plebeian battalions after having disobeyed an order from Catalonia military governor to use force to break the first general strike, which had been called by workers to defend the right to unionize. So the dirges of the fate of the Comunal Garde Nacional in the spring of 1871 in Barcelona were intimately tied to something much closer and local. They were tied to the brief but influential autochthonous experiences of plebeian republican power, experiences of worker inclusion in institutions like the national militia, or the trials of mixed labor juries during the 1868-1871 period. So let me finish with 3 conclusions derived from this double episode of the labor strike and federal republicanism show of force in Barcelona in the spring of 1871. First, that the existence and strength of trade unionism and the continued defense of trade's political and moral economy since at least mid-19th century in industrialized Catalonia provided the first and principal local network through which AIT entered Spain between 1870 and 1872. Government repression, which hid its local motives in global reasons, favored the intensification of the former with the latter. Second, that it was precisely through its long-term imbrication with trade unionism that the Spanish federal republicanism internationalized in the early 70s, integrated its own discussions of plebeian politics and popular insurrection with those that came from Paris, London, and Geneva. Several authors have addressed the swift division between political and anti-political circles at the heart of FRE, but very few have ventured to look at the factors and reasons behind such division, as if it could be entirely attributed to the various circles' embrace of Bakunin or Marx position. And finally, the crisis of 1871 offers new evidence on the weight of local dynamics in the genesis and development of an internationalist culture in Spain. For example, the centrality of actions delimited by union, sector, and territory that would characterize a significant fraction of Spanish anarcho-syndicalism before and after 1881 was constructed upon experiences such as the one analyzed here. Thank you very much.